Hi everybody. If you're a Sony Alpha user and also on Reddit, you may already be aware of the r/SonyAlpha subreddit. This is a community of about 11 or 12,000 people posting their pictures, asking questions, and I try to answer as many as I can when I have time, but I've also noticed that there are a lot of very similar questions asked several times a week. What's the best travel lens? What would you buy for $500? What are the best batteries? Etc. So my goal here is to create an FAQ series of sorts that can be referenced when needed. The first topic of which is SD cards. Which ones should you be buying? And I'll preface this by saying that this covers all E-mount alphas up to the a6500 and a7rII. It does not cover the A9 or any of the alphas coming out later this year. I would assume that they will have different requirements, but I'll explain that in a moment. Now, it's important to understand two things about all current alphas. One is that they have a write speed limitation of around 35 megabytes a second. So when you shoot a burst of photos and fill up the camera's cache, it will empty no faster than 35 megabytes a second until it's clear, and there is no way around that limitation, no matter how fast of a card you buy. Second, for shooting videos in 4K, Sony requires the use of a quote-unquote UHS-1 Class 3 SD card. And without going into the detail about the madness that is SD card labeling, this basically means that the manufacturer certifies that the card will never write slower than 30 megabytes a second. It can write faster, but not slower. Some manufacturers have also adopted the new video speed class, which is a little easier to understand. A V30 card will write no slower than 30 megabytes a second. A V60 card will write no slower than 60 megabytes a second, and so on. So when you look at a series of SD cards like Sandisk's Extreme, Extreme Plus, and Extreme Pro, they're all UHS-1 Class 3 cards, and they all have pretty much the same read speed. They only differ a little bit in their write speed, the slowest one being about 50 to 60 megabytes a second, and the fastest one being a little over 80. So even the slowest card will be faster than the 35 megabytes a second your camera can provide. So why buy the Pro when the regular Extreme will perform exactly the same? There's no reason. You can save a bit of money. You don't need the Pro. You don't need the Plus. You can go with just the regular Extreme. So, often those new to shooting video will read that Sony records 4K video at around 100 megabits per second. But they can't. But when you look at the packaging, you might see a number that says like 95 MBS. Don't get your bits and bytes confused. 100 megabits per second is only 12.5 megabytes per second, and that's less than half the minimum write speed of any UHS-1 Class 3 or V30 card. The numbers written on an SD card they are always in megabytes per second, not in megabits per second. And if there's only one number on the package, it always refers to the read speed, not the write speed. Manufacturers are a little cagey about the write speed because oftentimes it's a lot slower than the read speed. Recording 4K video doesn't require particularly fast write speed, just a consistent one, which is why the speed class labeling for SD cards exists. It establishes a minimum that the card should never fall below. You might have noticed that I'm using microSD cards. Yes, that is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. There are no penalties for doing so, and it gives you a little bit more flexibility because you can take the card out of your camera and pop it into a tablet or phone to review your pictures or footage. Of course, there's no reason why you can't use full-size SD cards, not a problem. So, last, let's talk about manufacturer. Now, I've been doing IT for 30 years and digital media for 30 years, and I have seen my share of flash fail. So I prefer to stick with the vendors who manufacture their own memory. So there's Sandisk, which has always had a good reputation, but was acquired by Western Digital. Then there's Lexar, which is the brand name that Micron uses for all of its flash products. But Micron is killing the Lexar brand, so it will either disappear or be bought by another company, and who knows what will happen after that. Then there's Samsung, which is by far the largest manufacturer of flash and pretty much owns the consumer SSD market. I don't have a problem recommending any of these three brands. For our purposes, the lowest end UHS-1 Class 3 card from any of them will perform as well as the highest. You'll usually find the best pricing from Samsung, and I'll have a number of links to the correct models below in the description. Now, there are other flash manufacturers in the market. They're just very small compared to the big guys, and brands like AData or Transcend will always source their flash from another party. Basically, the few bucks that you save isn't worth the extra risk going with the off-brand models, as far as I'm concerned. Now, one more thing I'll mention is the concept of buying smaller cards and buying more of them rather than buying fewer large cards. I like having a card, stuffed in the glove box in the car, the card maybe in my drawer at work, etc. You never know when you're going to need an SD card, and having them everywhere just increases the chances that you'll have one when you need one. Now, earlier I mentioned that all of this only applies to current models of Sony cameras. I expect that with the release of the A7 Mark III models, Sony will move on to the UHS-2 standard, as they have in the A9 series. The UHS-2 bus allows for a 300 megabytes per second top speed. Some existing Sony Alphas are compatible with UHS-2 cards, but they won't write any faster, and since the cards are still comparatively expensive, the only benefit you'll see is perhaps an improvement of read speed when transferring your images to your computer. To do that, you need both a UHS-2 card and a UHS-2 reader. So it's an option if you want some future-proofing, but unless you really need the extra speed right now, I would wait for lower prices. So that's it. Pretty much all you need to know about SD cards for your Sony Alpha. Remember, if you like this video, please hit subscribe and hit that like button, and I'll see you next time.